All right, hello and welcome back. So I've labeled this this live Q&A as part one. It's a Thursday afternoon here in California, Southern California. So I have no idea if anybody's even going to be on, but I wanted to get this topic up and moving. We'll probably do multiple. My feeling is that we're going to be doing multiple parts of this and talk about it a lot, because there's actually, like I always do, I always cram a bunch of information into one thing, and then I end up having to talk about it some more. So we're going to be talking about Nibiru, Planet X. We're going to be talking about this connection of Nibiru, Planet X, with the upcoming full solar eclipse that's going to be going across the continent of North America. It's going to be, in fact, it's going to be completely, if I'm accurate, if I'm correct, on the continent, it's going to be completely held within the United States itself. So we've got a lot of talk about what does this mean? What is happening? There's a lot of talk of Nibiru and Nibiru coming close to the Earth. There's talk about, I think, September. What's the date I have on here? Let's see if I can find it. September 23rd. Yeah, so there's talk that on September 23rd of this year that it's going to be the end of the world. And so, as always I say, listen, when a lot of people are talking about something, there's something to it. The question is whether or not people have a complete understanding where they're getting their information, how they're viewing the information in their own brain. And so it is my job here to clear up all the misunderstandings while at the same time revealing to you the truth about all of the hubbub, about all of this stuff. Americans tend to be slightly... Some of you from other countries might say I'm being a little too kind, but Americans tend to be slightly narcissistic about their experience with the rest of the world. And so, of course, we do have eclipses all over the world, but when it's happening in the United States, it's the end of the world. Because we really do see ourselves as the center of the universe. And we definitely see ourselves as the center of the world, and I guess there's some truth to that. We are the only remaining superpower so far on the planet, and so, we do have a lot of influence. So perhaps this could be the end of the world if the United States were to collapse instantaneously. What would that mean? Would that mean the end of the world? And what does that mean, the end of the world? What does that mean? So, before I get into slicing up all the different aspects of all this and looking at what I think is important and what you can do, listen, most important thing here is that this eclipse is a powerful eclipse, and if you are able to take advantage of it, you can, there are things that you need to know about how to take advantage of this solar eclipse and use it to maximize your life. So we're going to talk about that. So let me just take a quick peek and see if anybody's doing anything here on a Thursday afternoon, if there's even anybody online. Oh, look at that. We've got, how many people did it say? 13 people already. Can't believe it. Look at that. Okay. Everybody's saying hello, hello, hello. All right. Oh, it's Saeed's birthday is the 23rd. Woohoo! Happy birthday, Saeed. All right. So this is going to be very important for you. This is going to change your whole world. That's what's going to happen. This is very important for me as well, because even though it's not my birthday, on the 23rd, the eclipse is going to be happening in the nakshatra of Magha. Magha is in Leo. My ascendant is Leo, and my ascendant is Magha. So that means the ascendant in Vedic astrology, for those that are interested, the ascendant is your physical body. It is your personality, how your personality is experienced, how your karma is experienced, is from the ascendant. Sorry, I'm getting distracted because somebody's texting me. So your ascendant gives you the perspective of how your karma is released into your life, and more importantly, the ascendant is how your karma unfolds and how you have control over it. Where your moon is from in Vedic astrology, the two most important things you want to look at first is the ascendant, and that's why the ascendant is the first house, and then you want to look at it from the moon. And the moon, then, if you take the moon from the first house, then you see all the karmas that you don't have control over, at least your experience of that. So the ascendant is important because the ascendant is how you can choose to take control and change the course of your life so you can bring it up to the next level. I'm lucky because I have my moon in my ascendant, which means that those things that come to me that feel like I can't control, in reality, I do have more choice. So again, this is just, take all of this with a grain of salt. The bottom line is, as I teach, you can control everything, and so part of this is just the illusion of how it appears to you. So anyway, we're going to get into that. So Renee Petronovich is asking, what effect does the eclipse have on current events in the USA, Sierra Leone, and Spain? We're going to talk about that because anyway, very interesting stuff. So, by the way, I didn't mention it, but you know who else has their ascendant in Magha, in Leo, in the Vedic astrological tradition? President Donald J. Trump. So, I and apparently Saeed and Donald J. Trump, we are going to have huge, massive shifts in our experience with our lives. So we're going to talk about what that means. What happens when you have the sun and the moon coming together in such a way where they are blocking each other out? Because that's what's happening. And so if you're directly underneath that, then there's going to be huge impacts on that. So I'll be talking to you about what to do during eclipses from a shamanic perspective, from a Vedic astrological perspective. I'm going to be talking about Nibiru, because Nibiru is very important. This idea of Nibiru, Planet X, this planet that comes into our solar system that brings incredible shifts, apocalypses, complete shifting of societies and of ruling dynasties, and destruction of the world, according to some people. So we're going to talk about that. What is the connection here? And as I said, there's a lot of stuff here. We probably won't be able to get into all of it because I do have to get off the phone in 2 hours and 5 minutes. I've got a client that I've got to talk to. So maybe we'll talk more today, or we'll do it on another day. But in any case, those are the things that we're going to do. So again, if you're coming on to the channel, the best way to interact with me is to leave me a question, is to ask me a question so that I can answer that. All right, so let's take a look here at, again, what it is that I want to talk about. I want to see this text really quickly. I'm just going to respond yes to this very quickly, and then I'm all yours for 2 hours and 5 minutes. Okay, so a lot of stuff to talk about. All right, so let's talk about what an eclipse is. Let me see if I have a picture of that here. I'm sure you know what an eclipse is, but okay, did I not? I did not upload a picture of an eclipse. All right, so that's the way it needs to be. All right, so let's just talk about Nibiru. So if you're not familiar with Nibiru, first let me give you the overview from modern spiritual understanding. I use that in quotes because you're going to see I'm going to I'm going to do what I always do, and I'm going to actually look at the source material and find out what Nibiru is. But first we have to talk about what people are saying Nibiru is. So, Nibiru is said to be a planet that is in the is orbiting the sun, but it has a very unusual orbit that, according to some, takes 3,600 years, and so it comes in very close to the sun, and then it goes all the way out, way past our solar system, and so that's why we can't see it. And some people say it hides behind the sun, and some people say it's a shadow planet, that it's actually here, and it phases in and out of our reality, and that under certain conditions you can look up in the sky and you can see Nibiru there, and there are pictures that I'll show you that claim to be pictures of Nibiru. But so the first thing is that people have been talking about Nibiru coming into our solar system and coming close to the planet Earth, maybe even colliding with it. But at the very least, as it comes into our solar system, it is said to disrupt all kinds of things, like the orbit of planets, comets, asteroids. It'll change tidal waves. It'll give the Earth a shift in the poles, which will of course change everything. Massive earthquakes, volcanoes, all of that kind of stuff. Now we get into some of the teachings that are being really thrown around these days, which is that Nibiru is the home planet of the reptilian Anunnaki. The Anunnaki, according to these, now I'm going to give you my understanding, but first let me give you the understanding as it is being taught. The Anunnaki are said to be reptilian creatures of a very sophisticated technological society who traveled from this planet X, Nibiru, to the Earth in order to mine it of gold, in order to protect its atmosphere, and as a result did some genetic manipulation of hominid species on this Earth and created human beings in order for us to work for them and worship them. And then there are some people who have some very elaborate history that go into basically all of the history of mankind has been directed by these Anunnaki reptilian shapeshifters. And anyway, so in order to take a look at what Nibiru is, we have to first talk about what people are saying it is. And these, I'll share with you where these teachings are coming from, and understand that I kind of lost my train of thought here. So Nibiru is said to be this planet that is coming into our solar system. So I guess let's talk about where this first started. Now, let me just tell you, David Icke, Quasi-Luminous, these guys, whether they know it or not, David Icke, I'm sure, knows it. I'm sure he's read all of the previous books that have created this theory, are building their teachings upon this original teaching that came about a few decades ago about there being astronauts from other planets that came and populated and seeded this Earth, and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to talk about where that first came from, but David Icke didn't come up with it. He built his theories off of where this stuff came from. So in terms of Nibiru being this planet of destruction that comes into our solar system, it was first brought into our modern understanding by this woman here. Now let me get up. I've got all kinds of windows open here on my computer. Let me see if I can give this person due justice. So let's take a look. She is, yeah. All right, so her name is Nancy Leader, and she's still around. And Nancy Leader, in 2003, started talking about Nibiru. and that she claimed that on May 27th, 2003, Nibiru was going to come into our solar system and was going to completely shift the poles of the Earth, and all kinds of horrible things were going to happen. And in fact, she claims that she got this information from aliens from Zeta Reticuli, who, according to her, contacted her and brought her on their ship and implanted some kind of thing into her brain which allows her to communicate directly with the Zeta Reticulans. Okay, so we might look at that and go, that sounds really crazy, but a lot of people really bought into this idea. And she started talking about Planet X and Nibiru, and she even went so far as to say that a week before, she was on a local radio station here in Los Angeles, and she was saying that people should euthanize their pets. She was telling people to kill their pets in anticipation of this event. And of course, as you know, it's 2017 as I'm recording this, so obviously Nibiru did not manifest. So when that didn't happen, when Nibiru did not manifest and do all these things and all that kind of stuff, then she chuckled and said that it was merely a white lie on her part. It was merely a white lie to fool the establishment. So right there, you know, there's some serious red flags. If a white lie is an innocent lie that you say in order to help a situation, right? So she's saying this is a white lie in order to fool the establishment, but this white lie, she went on to tell people to kill their pets for no reason. So, you know, but I could go on and on about her and what a fraud she is and all that kind of stuff. But she's still around, and she's still very popular, and people are listening to her. And she's the one that really got the ball rolling about Planet X and Nibiru coming into our solar system and destroying all life as we know it. So let's take a look here. So now the question is, okay, she was wrong apparently about that, but the question still remains, does Nibiru exist? Is Nibiru talked about by the ancient Mesopotamians, the Sumerians? Well, it was 4,000 years ago, something like that, 4,500 years ago. The first people that we know of that wrote and gave writing to planet Earth, the Sumerians, they talked about Nibiru. Is that true? The answer is yes, they did talk about Nibiru. Did they talk about Nibiru being an object in the sky? Yes, they did. Did they talk about Nibiru having tremendous effects on our planet? Absolutely, they did. That is all true. So let's take a look at some pictures of Nibiru. The first one I'm going to show you is obviously not an actual photograph, but this is what people are saying Nibiru is, and the size of it. You'll see it compared to Jupiter and the Earth. Okay, so that's obviously not a real photograph of Nibiru, but that's what people are claiming it is. Some people say it's a brown dwarf star. So obviously something of that massiveness, with that kind of gravitational field, if that were to come anywhere near our solar system, that would cause tremendous havoc. I mean, that could absolutely be a world ender, for sure. So the question is it out there? Now, you saw how big it was in that picture. So then the question is, if something that massive just even started to approach our solar system, we would be able to see it with the naked eye. As it so happens, there are people who claim to tell us that you can see Nibiru with the naked eye, and they have photographic evidence to prove it. So let's take a look at that. So, I think like me, most of you can deduce what that actually is. And actually, you know, this is actually a bigger issue than I would have thought, because I've had a lot of people contact me with photographs and say, look at these photographs, and they either want to say that it's a spirit or that's an angel. Well, I used to be a photographer back in the 70s, and back then, even, especially back in the 70s, when you had to deal with film, your lens was really important. So you had to really understand a lot about lenses, and you actually had to do things by hand. There was no such thing as automatic. It was just starting to come into vogue. We had Instamatic cameras, which were basically little boxes that you clicked, and it just had one tiny little lens in it. And so that was the closest we got to automatic. But if you're actually using a lens, you had to fix the aperture, you had to focus it yourself, and all that kind of stuff. So you became very familiar with these things called lens flares. And in fact, if you remember movies back in the 70s, for those of you that are old enough to remember, it was, when you went to the movies, there was a lot of movies, especially westerns. They would have these opening shots where the camera would pan through the sky and grab the sun as you're panning through the sky, and you'd see this long trail of lens flares. And because the camera was moving, you could see the lens flares moving in opposition with the sun, and we just got used to it. And I think we thought it was artistic or something, because a photographer, especially somebody who's filming, is really going to want to check and see if the lens is putting some kind of strange, altered effect on your picture. So they would do that on purpose because it looked cool, the way the lens flare sort of magnified and came across. But that's all that is. It's just a lens flare. And people are throwing these pictures around like, here's Nibiru, take a look at Nibiru. Or they'll say, Nibiru is a shadow planet. I mean, I went online looking at this, getting ready to talk about this subject, and there are people who have links to 24-hour webcams, faced at the setting sun, so that they can catch Nibiru. And all that's happening is that as the sun comes down, there'll be a lens flare, some kind of lens anomaly that will catch some kind of thing that looks like, is that a planet? It's a lens flare. So I'm sorry to tell you that these photographs here are not actually trying to show you this. Because that's kind of the thought process, is that a lot of people are saying, yeah, well, we can't find it with our telescopes, but it's definitely there. And when the blah, blah, blah on the right, you can see it. Nope, it's just a lens flare. I could talk about all of the scientific reasons why it would literally be impossible for any planet of any magnitude to come anywhere near us without us first knowing about it way in advance, and without it having huge effects. So the idea that Nibiru is going to magically appear, like between Mars and Earth, and it's just going to happen overnight, and then it's just not scientifically possible. By the time Nibiru started coming anywhere near our solar system, there would be just major havoc among all of the planets, not to mention our own. And so our planet, even though we've got, things like climate shifts that are happening and ice ages and stuff like that, we haven't had anything come close to what Nibiru would do, regardless of how big it was. So let's just get rid of that idea that Nibiru is going to come into our solar system. But then again, we go back to the thought process of, why are we talking about it? Why are we talking about it, and why does it always come up when we talk about eclipses? Because that's when it happens. Whenever there's a solar eclipse, people start wanting to talk about the end of the world, and they start talking about Nibiru. And this year, we've got a whole new thing happening, which says that in September 23rd of this year, there's going to be an alignment of planets that is going to bring, according to a lot of, I'm going to call them New Age biblical scholars, it's going to bring the end of the world. It's going to bring the apocalypse of Revelation. And they say that's because of all this and that, and Virgo and Leo and the moon and the sun and all that. I'm not going to get into all that, but the real question is, why? Why do people start talking like this? We could easily just say, well, they're just a bunch of superstitious, uneducated idiots, and they're, you know, looking for any reason. But you know what? It's more than that. Because eclipses do have an effect, and they do have strong symbolism. You know, I'm a Vedic astrologer, so I believe that our experience of the light that hits us from the stars and of the planets has a strong impact. So when we have something as impactful as an apocalypse, excuse me, Freudian slip there. When we have something as impactful as an eclipse, then I have to take it seriously when I'm hearing all of these people not only talking about the end of the world because it's an eclipse, but then they're talking about Nibiru, Planet X, and they're talking about the aftermath of that, because it is according to Vedic astrology, the leading up to an eclipse and the aftermath of an eclipse is extremely important, and that you are going to have major effects from that. Some people more than others, but in any case, it's important to understand that this one is going to have an effect. To what degree, we shall find out. But the reason why it's so important is because it is going over 100% over the continental United States, from west to east. It is happening in the nakshatra of Magha. It is happening in the sign of Leo. And so we happen to have, you know, the United States, if there was a ruling kingdom over the world, which we really don't have, but the closest thing to a ruling kingdom over the whole world would be the United States. We don't have kings in the United States. We have presidents, but we happen to have a president who, regardless of what you think of him, he has said that he wanted to be seen as a king. He said that very early on, at least according to, you know, insiders in the White House. He is definitely a Leo. I'm a Leo, so I know what that's like to want to be the king. As you know, I'm the king of my channel. I'm the king of my world. And he is the president. So he's the closest thing to a king that we've got. And so anybody just looking at a solar eclipse going directly over the nation of a man ruling that nation who happens to have the ascendant of Magha in Leo, that's a big deal. So why is it such a big deal that it's Leo? Because Leo is the sign of the sun. And the eclipse is when the moon and the sun come together. It's a new moon. So that right there affects the mind, because that's what the moon is. The moon is the mind and the emotions. And the sun is the soul and the ego, the conscious mind. And here we have them lining up in such a way where they're canceling each other out. So there's a new moon, meaning there's no moon, because the only way that the moon affects us is when the sun is reflecting off of the moon. A new moon is when the moon is in such a place where the sun can't reflect off of it. So we call it a new moon, and we experience that. I can tell you, because I've got moon in my first house, and I was born on a new moon, so I can definitely feel when new moons come around. I feel it. So here you have not just the moon being eclipsed, because that happens in essence once a month every time we have a new moon. But now we have the sun being completely blotted out of the sky. By what? The moon. It means that, not, you know, when you've got one or the other, when you've got the moon, the new moon, you still have the soul. So a good idea to work with on new moons is to worship the sun. To do things that empower the soul, because that's what's missing, is that the mind doesn't have any sunlight, any soul light reflecting off of it. So focusing on the soul helps the mind. When you've got the sun and the moon together like this, where they can't help each other, they're killing each other, basically, then that's when people feel like the whole world is coming apart. That's why we're talking, especially in the United States, especially Christians in the United States. It's crazy the amount of born-again Christians who are going nuts over this, who are sure that this is going to be the end and the beginning of the apocalypse, and they've, you know, taken scripture and blah, 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 and that's why the 23rd. Well, they're right about one thing. They're right that this eclipse has the potential to completely, totally change our world. But at the very least, I can promise you that me and Saeed and Donald J. Trump, our entire worlds are going to be completely obliterated and put back together again. So now the difference is, when you're dealing with these kinds of eclipses, you have two choices. You can do what a lot of Vedic astrologers say. Go inside, close the doors, and close the window and pray. Don't go out underneath it. Definitely don't look at it. Pregnant women should not go out underneath. As you can hear by the tone of my voice, I think that's ridiculous. I mean, whatever effect that sunlight is going to have, I mean, you know, the solar radiation and all kinds of things pass through buildings all the time. So getting inside of a building is not going to prevent anything. I mean, obviously, if you stare at the sun, it's bad for your eyes. That's not what I'm saying. But that's ridiculous. This is fear. So you hear me talking about fear-based nonsense. Now, if somebody is in fear, if what they want to do is hold on to their old life. So I'm telling, you know, Donald J. Trump doesn't watch my channel, but if he were, I would say, Mr. President, if you are seeking to hold on to power as you understand it, you are potentially making things very challenging for yourself, because this is going to tear that away from you. So what's the other way to deal with it? The other way to deal with it is to go out there and embrace this change. It's a complete change of identity. I mean, because that's what, you know, for me, this is my ascendant. It's my identity. It's my, and the sun is the soul. So it's going to affect my ego, not only on a physical level, but on a spiritual level. I'm going to be asking myself, who the heck am I? It's gonna take away things that, you know, had such major impact on me. And you know, it's already happened. My mother passed away, I don't know, a week ago. So here that is. I mean, you know, that's a big deal. That's the moon right there. And as it so happens, Saturn, when my mother died, Saturn was retrograde in my fourth house. Fourth house is the house of the mother, as well as the home. So Saturn is death. Retrograde Saturn is supernuclear Saturn. So there's no coincidence that my mother passed away. And you don't have to feel sorry for me. She'd been a vegetable for a long time. You know, I love my mother. I wish her the best, but we all saw it coming. So, but there's no coincidence that my mother died during that. So I can tell you this is going to be huge for me. We're watching the news, regardless of what side you are on the political spectrum. I'm going to do my best not to take a side. I'm trying so hard. We can, you know, it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. You can see that Donald Trump is having some serious problems right now with his what? His image. His image is coming apart at the seams. The press is constantly, every single day there is multiple things happening that if one of them were to happen to any other president or any other presidential candidate or any politician for that matter, it would completely destroy their career for eternity. But this is happening to him every single day. because of this. This is coming. If he is willing to completely have his identity completely taken apart and put back together, and if he goes with that process, he could rule the world. That's the power of eclipses. So that's the next thing I want to tell you, is that eclipses are the best time to do rituals. So if you have rituals to do it during the eclipse. But understand that you are taking advantage of a power of darkness that is coming to completely destroy the world as you know it. Your world. And that's what Nibiru stands for. Nibiru stands for this new world that is coming into your solar system that has the potential to completely obliterate your world as you know it. Okay, so I kind of got off there. So I do intend to go and take a look and tell you what Nibiru is, what it represents, and how it relates to all this. We'll see if we have enough time to do that. I'm going to go ahead and I'm really enjoying this particular intro film that I made, so I'm going to put that on while I check to see if there are any questions and sort of get my thoughts together about where I want to go next, because we've got a lot of talk about before 5 o'clock. Okay, so we do have some questions, and already some political things are starting to creep out. I really do have to walk a tightrope here, because if I were to reveal my politics, I could potentially lose half of you guys. So since my job is here to help, I'm going to do my best to stay neutral about all that. All right, so will the solar eclipse have us feeling confused and depressed? It is very possible. In fact, it's probably already having that effect on a lot of people. And again, this is, when we talked about Saturn, and I explained to you the best way to deal with Saturn is to learn the lesson. In fact, I was listening to a Vedic astrologer. I'm doing readings, almost on a daily basis, and so I go to other astrologers' websites and things like that for help when there's something I want to figure out. And this guy was talking about Saturn. He was talking about how, Saturn, as it goes through all of your 12 houses, affects all the 12 aspects of your life and your personality. And he says on a daily basis, he goes through and checks those 12 aspects of himself to see if he's in alignment, if he has learned the lessons. And that's what Saturn is all about. It's all about, Saturn is here to destroy all of your misunderstandings, your illusions, your delusions about your identity and yourself as it relates to the actions that you take in your life. Karma, actions. So when you learn the lessons. The difficult things in your life are lessons that Saturn is saying, hang on a second here. You are out of alignment with yourself, and I want to help you. But I am not going to let you get away with this. I'm going to make you feel the pain of that until you learn the lesson. And when you learn the lesson, Saturn goes, that's it. That's all I wanted. Here's a bunch of stuff. Here, be king of the world. You know, Saturn wants to keep you humble, because when you're humble, you're in that place of being surrendered to the life force of the universe, and when you're surrendered to it, you can then master it. That's what Saturn wants to give. And so, even though we're talking about Rahu, which is the north node of the moon that swallows the sun and the moon, there's a close connection, because it's sort of like, you know, Rahu is the aspect which is solar eclipses. Rahu is the aspect of the universe that comes and says, okay, I am going to bring about all of your fears and all of your illusions, so that you can either do one of two things. You can either, out of fear, struggle against them and make them stronger, like the snake. When you struggle against a boa constrictor, it just squeezes you stronger and stronger until it kills you. Or you can relax and face them, let go of those misunderstandings, those fears, those ego attachments, and then actually rule the universe. So those are the two sides of this coin. This is what's going to come out. This is why we're having racial violence in the streets of the United States in 2017. Who would have thought? I wouldn't have thought that. In the 70s, we were going to fix all that. We thought by this time everybody would be like Star Trek. There would be no money and everybody would be living together. And no, things are worse now than they've ever been in terms of polarization of ideas. I've never seen so much racism in my life. So we've got, not only do we have race in the streets, racial violence in the streets, but we have people arguing about whether or not it's really happening. Okay, my thing went offline, so let's see if we come back online. Yep, come back online. Okay, so can't get too intense, or, you know, the powers that be, the reptilians will shut off my transmission. All right, so I'm having a lot of fun today with all this. So anyway, I did get distracted. I forgot what I was saying, but I was answering somebody's question about, does the solar eclipse have us feeling confused and depressed? That is very likely what's going to happen. And so the thing to do is to be aware of that. When you feel the fear and the paranoia and the schizophrenic paranoia start to creep in, because that's what's happening. People are losing it. They're just completely coming unraveled at the level of their ego, of their identity, of their personality. It's a very real effect that this has on us. To go up, I'm supposed to, this is good. I'm supposed to lean into this. And listen, the thing to do is don't make any big decisions. You know, I think I'm going to take the day off that day, and I'm just going to go and enjoy myself. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to spend that day, because it has such a huge impact on my personality. And I think it's going to have major, you know, impact. I mean, this could be like a huge turning point for me. So we'll see. The way that this could work is if I lean into this and I face all of these destruction of my ego. First off, it's going to be a test to see how well I've done up to this point. Because if I go through this with relatively unscathed, that means that I've done my job in terms of getting in touch with my own issues and releasing all of the fears and all of the misunderstandings and all that kind of stuff. But so I believe I'm going to take the day off, and I'm going to just focus on myself and see where it goes. But it'll be a test, because if I'm flipping out about things, then that's what's going to tell me the things I really need to let go of and work on. So it's also a barometer. If you're flipping out, there's a good chance that there's some things, some lessons that you need to embrace. So don't make any big decisions. You know, the thing about staying inside and closing the doors and the windows, that represents really focusing inward, which I absolutely support, but you know, I don't necessarily think you need to stay inside. In any case, let me see if there's any more questions about this. How do you, Andy LMT says, how do you deal with knowing your life will be obliterated and not freak out? Well, because it's not you that's going to be obliterated. It is the false idea of your life. So when I use the word your life or your world, I'm using that in quotes. I don't think the world is going to blow up. I don't think I don't think there's going to be any, you know, huge cataclysms. There might be little things that happen here or there, maybe somewhat, you know, notable things that happen, but I think the world will continue to go on. What will change is that there will be a shift. It's almost like walking through a door into another world. It's like, you know, this picture here where we have opportunities, and I think this is a very real way to look at it. When you have an opportunity here to make a decision about which path you want to traverse, this is one of those nexus points where during the eclipse you can be thinking about what it is you want to intend. And I'll talk about, I think, how to make use of that. But this is what it's like. You are going to have multiple options in front of you. In fact, at every single moment of your existence, you have infinite numbers of realities that you can choose from. According to physics, anything you can possibly imagine has to exist in another reality. It has to. According to physics, it's impossible, which means that, you know, I don't know, pick one. You know, something that could be absolutely, totally impossible. That is happening on another timeline, so you can use eclipses. Eclipses are these moments where you have this nexus point where if you are aligned with yourself enough, you can literally jump onto a completely different timeline. A completely different universe will appear before you. But if you stay in your fears, if you stay in your old patterns, if you stay, you know, trying to hold on to the old world, then what is going to happen is that you will create a potential future that will be, you know, it will just be worse than where you are. So fear, it's okay. Listen, it's okay to have feelings. I want to be clear about this. Fear is a feeling, and it means that, you know, you're afraid for your life. Fear, listen, if I'm walking down the street and a bus starts careening out of control towards me, my fear better be there to kick in so that I run and get out of the way. So fear has a valid place. All feelings, sadness, anger, fury, love, you know, all of it. We wouldn't function without them. So when you feel your fear, you can ask yourself and say, what is it that I'm afraid of? Maybe you won't be able to answer that question, but, you know, if you focus on the fact that the universe is here to serve you, and that the universe is waiting to align itself to help you not only achieve your highest success and your greatest happiness, but it's looking to align you to a new path so that it can give you everything that you truly want. But if you are going after things you don't really want, things that aren't aligning with your deepest soul, then the universe says, I can't help you. The universe will not help you destroy yourself. And this is, you know, what the challenge of being a human is. This is why we're here. Listen, if it were easy, we would all show up here as human beings as completely, totally infinite beings of light, which is what we are, full of peace and perfection, and we would just simply, you know, intend our perfect life, but that would bore the crap out of us. That's why we made human life so challenging. It's like there's no such thing as a video game that's easy. I don't care if you're playing solitaire. I mean, there has to be some risk that you're not going to be able to get all the cards lined up. Otherwise, it's no fun, because if you win every time, that's a hell in and of itself. That's boring. So embrace all of that stuff, and this is what you can do during this eclipse. Really embrace all of your fears, and if you're overwhelmed by them, then don't take any action. Just focus on anything that gets you connected to the universe is your friend. Whether it's worshiping the sun, whether it's worshiping deities associated with the sun. Jesus, for example, even though I'm not a Christian, Jesus would be one of those, because Jupiter is also a force that works against the Rahu-Saturn connection. So any deity that focuses on that kind of high-level spirituality, if you worship Rama, Superman, go watch a Superman movie. Superman is nothing more than a modern-day version of the Hindu Rama, which is Rama, which means sun and moon. Go read the stories about Rama, about Hanuman, the Monkey King. Read about Shiva. Read about, in the Norse tradition, read about, gosh, why am I forgetting his name? The sun god that goes to the underworld. Read about, work with the Raido rune. Work with the Sawol rune. Anybody on there? What's his name? I should know this. The guy's name. The sun god who goes to the sun, who goes to the underworld. I forget his name. Anyway. So if you want a really intense experience, you can worship Odin. Odin is Mercury, and so Odin has a strong vibration with Loki and with Rahu and with the dark side, and transforming your awareness. So Odin will give you a really powerful connection. If you use especially his Germanic name Woden, give you a very powerful connection with transforming your consciousness. So just embrace it. Look, if you knew that, let's say for example, that the economy was going to shift from paper money to seashells, for example. I'm saying that now because there's so many shells on the beach. I've actually got, I've got a collection of like sand dollars when I go surfing, when I go to the beach. If you knew that the economy was shifting from paper dollars to shells, you would be at the beach scooping up as many shells as you could fit into the back of your car, right? You would embrace it, and you would say, oh, cool, there's something new coming. Let's be a part of what this new thing is. But if you're acting out of fear, if you're acting, not feeling, if you're acting out of fear, meaning you want to hold on to the old ways, the way things I just don't want things to change. I want my stuff and then you're going to be really challenged. Then you're going to wake up that next day when, the Yahoo says, money paper's no good. You can only buy food with seashells. You're going to be like, why didn't I go pick up the seashells? I wish I had known about the seashells. So the way that you know about the seashells is to make the decision internally that you trust the universe. The universe is here to help you. And that if you ask yourself, what is it I truly want, you will find out. Because what this, I keep wanting to call it apocalypse, what this eclipse wants to do is to get rid of the things you think you want that you don't really want. People ask me things like, well, what if my deepest desire is to take drugs all day? That's not your deepest desire. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be fun, and you might enjoy, at least for some little bits and times you might enjoy it, but it's not what you want. What you truly want, when you go after it, it keeps getting better, not worse. So we have to figure out the difference between our obsessions and our addictions and our attachments and what it is our soul truly wants. That's what this eclipse is here to give you. Especially, this is an opportunity for the personality of the United States to change. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens here. This could very well mean the complete destruction of Donald Trump's presidency. Because just because of the fact that he has a Leo ascendant. Just for that, in and of itself, it could mean that. But like I said, if he has the ability to take a look and do all the things I just said, he could rule the world. And I'll leave it up to you guys to decide, you know, which direction he's most likely to go. So let me take a look at more questions here. Okay, so there's a couple of good questions. One of them, a couple of them I do want to address before we go any further. Okay, so C. Batranu says, I hear this. Planet Nibiru destroyed the Atlantis continent in past. Is this true? No. Now, I'm going to tell you something about Atlantis that a lot of people aren't going to like. Atlantis was not a continent in the Atlantic Ocean. Atlantis was the island of Santorini. If you know anything about the island of Santorini, it was a volcanic island that blew up. I mean, it's, you know, the recordings of what happened and the tidal wave that it created. It was a total destroyer of civilizations in the Mediterranean. But there was a city on that island called Atlantis. And it had a naval fleet and all that. So that's what they're talking about. This is, again, partial truth. People want to talk about Atlantis and turn it into this thing. I'm sorry. As cool as the stories of Atlantis are, of it being this amazing, you know, other than the Atlantean this and that, and it sounds so cool, and the race of human beings on Atlantis that were... I love all that stuff. I wish it were true. But, you know... Listen, here's the thing about being a true shaman. As you guys know, I teach some pretty out there stuff. And I'm no stranger to deep spiritual concepts. I talk about trolls and elves and dwarves, and I talk about ascended masters, and I talk about having energy and being able to strike people without touching them and, you know, leaving your body. I talk about all this kind of stuff. But if you really want to be effective, you've got to be willing to look at the facts that are in front of you. So whenever I have a spiritual experience, every time I go out of my body and I travel to another dimension, whenever I receive information, the first thing I do is, in waking consciousness, I do research to back it up to see if there's any truth in it. And some of the more profound stuff I've taught have come as a result of me not only finding it's true, but backing it up. So what happens when there's things like Atlantis and all that, it's people intuiting truths and then allowing their two-dimensional reptilian brain to then create something that's just not true, but based on a partial truth. So no, Nibiru did not destroy the Atlantis continent. Atlantis was merely a volcanic island that had a civilization on it, and it was destroyed through a volcanic eruption. Romney on Germany is right. If this planet was ever here, it would have destroyed far more than Atlantis. It would have destroyed... We wouldn't be here. So Chris says, is the best thing to do is stay home? No. If you want, but you know, the thing to do is to know that just be... It's good if you want to spend some time alone and meditate and think. You know, I think I'm going to go to the beach and walk around, maybe do some surfing or whatever, and really focus on, you know, what reality do I want to create? What new path of destiny do I want to walk on? What of what I've been holding on to am I ready to let go of? That's a good way to go about it. So Renee Michelle says, don't we attract our fears if we dwell upon it? Well, there's a difference between indulging in your fears and facing them. So, you know, that's, you know, feeling fearful, there's nothing wrong with that. What we tend to do as human beings is when we have feelings like fears is we want to stuff them down or run away from them, which can cause more problems. You know, somebody wants to inject heroin in their neck because they don't want to feel fear. That's an obvious bad way of dealing with your fears. If you indulge in them and you sit around and you start looking for things, which is what most people do, they go and watch InfoWars, or they go onto social media, or they go onto YouTube, and they look for videos that confirm their fears. No, that's not a good way of dealing with it. Remember, the base assumption that I'm teaching is that the universe is here to help you. The universe is here to serve you. And so if your world is coming apart, it means the universe is saying, hey, here's a really cool opportunity to get rid of things that aren't working for you. What do you want? What do you really want? Let's talk about it. You know, are you afraid of losing things in your life? Let's talk about that. What are you afraid of? It's okay to be afraid of that. Are you, you know, and then you can ask, what are you afraid of? Are you afraid of losing your car, your home, your relationship? Ask yourself, what would happen if I lost them? You know, am I still going to be okay? You know, and if you have an experience with the universe that no matter what, no matter how difficult the challenge is, the universe takes care of you if you listen to your deepest soul desire, then you can say, yeah, I don't want to lose that, but I'd be okay if I did. And in fact, I can see how I could benefit from that. Getting in that mindset, then you're bulletproof. It's hard to do, but that's the way to do it. Okay, we got a new person here, Dive into Spirit 33. She says some nice things. I've come across your videos and catching myself up on all your stuff. You profoundly helped me bring clear seeing on my spiritual path. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're very welcome. Welcome to the channel. I recommend everybody new to the channel, don't just watch these Q&As. Go to my actual YouTube channel, Thunder Wizard, DOTCOM, thunderwizard.com, and look and watch the videos. I've got so many videos on my channels, and so much good stuff. So take use of that. Make use of that. Really get to know what I'm teaching. Andy LMT, so shouldn't we be focused on Rahu? You can be focused on Rahu. This is a good time to worship Rahu. Worship deities associated with Rahu, Loki. But then again, it's also good. This is why I recommend people get a Vedic reading with me, because based on your chart, I can tell you whether or not, oh yeah, you should definitely be worshiping Rahu right now, or you know what, you should be focused on the sun. Because, you know, for some people, Rahu may be too challenging, too overwhelming. The safe thing for everybody to do is worship the sun. But I definitely recommend people facing the darkness, those who have the ability. Okay. Is there a certain time that is best to do our ritual of the 9 knots? By the way, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, the spell of the 9 knots, I don't know if you'd get it in time, but let's see, where is it? Spell of the 9 knots, where are you? I know you're around here somewhere. There it is. I think that's the streaming version. I think the DVD has a different cover on it. But that is one of those practices that if you do, it's one of those one-time things that if you do it correctly and you're clear about what it is you want to do and you're prepared for the outcome, that is one of those times where you could literally open up the gateways to all of the 9 worlds, a nexus point, and create a brand new reality. So the most powerful time to do that, you know, I hadn't thought about it, the day before. See, the day before is true when we're talking about moon, like full moons and new moons. The day just before the full moon is the strongest, because on the full moon the energy is actually starting to crest, and it might actually be on its way down. So the day before is that energy is really rising. It's really powerful. The day before a new moon is the most powerful to take a look at your deepest, darkest issues. If you want to start, and then when you start with the day after the new moon, and you can do a ritual from then all the way up to the full moon. I've done that before. That's a ritual to empower the mind, which is the moon. So my instinct is that to do it during the eclipse is probably an incredibly powerful time where you've already got this nexus point, where the eclipse is bringing this nexus point because it's blocking out the sun and the moon, and so it's actually a window to multiple universes, which is why people are afraid of, you know, ghosts and apocalypses and all that kind of stuff, because they're afraid. They're afraid of all these, you know, all that kind of stuff. When you do the spell of the 9 knots, you're intensifying that. You're literally opening up all of the 9 worlds under the eclipse. Really, really powerful stuff. But you got to be prepared for the outcome. If you're not prepared for, you know, completely, totally changing your experience, then I recommend staying indoors and worshiping Rama, worshiping the soul. Okay, so let me see. I think there's some other questions that I wanted to get to here. What is my definition of worship? Well, I throw the word worship and ritual around sort of interchangeably. So worship can be anything from, you know, sunbathing, you know, going out and getting a tan, going up and looking at the full moon, closing your eyes and experiencing the power of nature, to putting an idol on an altar and calling the name of such and such deity and praying to them and doing mantras. It can be at any level of that. I don't have an agenda one way or another. I can tell you which ways of worship work best for different aspects of your mind and what you want to accomplish. For instance, if you want to change unconscious patterns, there's 3 minds: conscious, subconscious, and unconscious. If you want to change unconscious patterns that will get rid of blocks that are preventing you from achieving and intending your life, then you want to do things like go in a temple and pray to an idol, because that's what your unconscious mind responds to. Okay, so that's a short answer to your question. What names did Rahu and Loki have in Egyptian times? Well, the names were Rahu and Loki, but we're talking about different cultural names. Rahu is the name of the swallower of the sun and the moon in the East Indian tradition. Loki is the name of the Norse tradition. So, you know, in the Egyptian times, I'm quite sure that the Germanic tribes people, as primitive as they were compared to the Egyptians, were running around praying to probably some variation of Loki, that same name. So, you know, I don't know enough about Egyptian gods to know whether it's Thoth or who it is. I'm sure some people on here know more about Egyptian deities than I do to know what the trickster deity is. That's a good question. All right, so let's do a little more business, and then we will get on with some more questions. Okay, so there are a couple of questions here I want to answer. Dive into Spirit 33 says, was wondering what is the difference between your higher self and your future self? It's a good question. So for those of you who, I believe she's responding to one of my videos where when you want to create a different reality, one of the things that you do, and I believe it's in one of the weirding videos, W-I-R-D, weirding, where you meditate and communicate with your higher self, which is your future self. So it goes like this. Again, you're sitting here on the edge of multiple realities. At every single moment of your existence, you have an infinite number of realities spreading out in front of you, and you, in every single nanosecond, are either reaffirming old beliefs and staying in old patterns, or you're making new adjustments. You're opening yourself up to new levels of trust and connection, and creating a higher resonance with your inner self, which obviously creates different futures. Every single moment we are sitting there looking at infinite numbers of paths in front of us. And so what she's asking, if I'm hearing the question right, is that what is the difference between your higher self and your future self? Well, so your future self, depending on what path you take, your future self could be your future self that made a serious mistake and went down the wrong rabbit hole and created a lot of negative karma for yourself. And then that future self, have you ever done that? Where you're like, you know what, if I could go back in time, I would tell myself. I've done that. I've been in places like that where I go, you know what, I really wish I could change this. And so what I do is I'll go into meditation and I will take myself back to the moment where I knew I walked out of my integrity, walked out of my alignment with my true self, and I will, you know, imagine myself telling myself what I should have done, which I wish I had done. And then what I do is I imagine then what would have taken place if I had followed that reality. And so in my mind, I imagine living out what would have happened. So that's just one way to change things. And then what ends up happening is that those vibrations catch up to where you are. And even though you still may be in a challenging situation, you now have the vibrations within you of what would have happened if you had followed the most empowering path for you. And then what ends up happening is that when you are in that emotional and mental state of being emotionally where it would be had you, aligned yourself, then what happens is you do end up creating the future of a higher alignment. Whereas instead of what a lot of people do is, myself included, I've done this, when people make a choice that's destructive, that's not, when you're acting out of alignment, when you act out of fear, then you end up someplace you really wish you weren't. What most people do is then they continue to dig themselves deeper in that hole, because then the fear creates this sort of fear loop that just makes things worse and worse. So that's, at any moment you can stop and say, you know what, I'm going to change this right now. I'm going to change this timeline right now. And that's one way you do it. So your future self is you that has more experience. Now, the way that I'm suggesting to use the future self, this is how you're talking to your past self. But when you want to communicate with your future self, then as you're standing at the crossroads between all of these paths in front of you, knowing that the most perfect reality that you could possibly imagine from deep within you does exist on another reality. That you are on another reality living the absolute climax epitome of what your perfect self would be if you were to make perfect choices. That exists. Now there may be more than one, but they exist. And so when you really want to align yourself you can go into meditation and ask to talk to the future self that has followed the most empowering, successful timeline, and then get advice. Ask yourself. There's a teacher out there, I forget his name. I think he calls himself the American monk. I forget what he calls it, but he has a great little self meditation practice where you do that. And he has a story about how he did that and all kind. He ended up winning all these photography awards. He knew nothing about photography, and he went asked his ideal self, or what, I don't know what he calls it, but that's what I'm calling it, your future self. What should I do? And the guy said, I don't know what he said, like whatever it was, it sounded ridiculous. And he went and did exactly what his future self told him to do. He took an Instamatic camera and just started taking pictures in a bunch of different directions. And then he got them developed. He put it on the bed in front of him. He spread it out, and he didn't know what he was looking at. And then he aligned it, and he saw that with all those different angles, that it created this three-dimensional view. And he ended up winning some a photography award for that. Didn't know what he was doing. So it's important, lots of times your future self, when you do this exercise, and I may have to do a video about exactly how to do that, but your future self will give you one or two words, because again, when you're communicating through multiple dimensions and multiple times, sometimes only one or two words get through. You have to do exactly what your future self tells you to do. I'll give you an example in my life. This was 2 years ago. 2.5 years ago, probably 2.5 years ago, and I was struggling, and I didn't know where to go, and I was, anyway, I was stuck, and so I'm like, okay, there's got to be some. I knew this understanding. There's got to be some me that's on a perfect timeline that knows what I should do right now. So I asked, give me one word for my next book. And let it be the one thing that's going to make the whole thing explode. And the word that came out was happiness. And I went, what? That's the last thing. I'm not happy right now. That's the last thing I know how to write about. So I took it literally, and I wrote a book on happiness, which you can find it. And I don't even think anybody's bought it. I don't think it's even sold one copy. And so I was like, well, I was wrong. Obviously, this doesn't work. But now, 2.5 years later, what is the focus of my teaching? The focus of my teaching for this book, which I tell you is the best book to get of mine when you want to know the basic understanding of how to master the universe, is the secret shamanic commandment to a perfect life. And what is the basis of that book? Is that you go after your deepest soul desire, which will bring you the most happiness, the most joy. And that is what has not only been life-changing for me on a personal level, but it's what's given me the success in what I'm doing with my career now, and it's given it's what's been so empowering to people, is this concept that we're not victims, that we live in a universe that wants to help us, but the caveat is you have to be following your deepest soul desire, not what you think you want or what you think other people or society wants for you. That's what's going to get you into trouble. And so that one word was 100% correct. I just didn't completely understand it. So when you do talk with your future self, and your future self gives you one or two words, you have to meditate on it, sometimes for months, before you really get to see it. But just by doing it, it will change your vibration if you listen to it. Say, okay, I don't understand what that means right now, but I'm open to it, and I'm listening to it, and I surrender to it. I don't get it yet. Your vibration then already begins to align with it. And then, as we know about the law of weird, where you are in the present moment creates a pattern in the past, which creates a new future. We're doing it every single moment. So this, I keep wanting to call it apocalypse. This eclipse is just one really powerful way to do what we do every single moment. And ideally, if somebody is doing this every single moment, then things like eclipses will come and go, and they won't even feel anything because they're already doing it. But most of us aren't at that level. So when eclipses come, we can use them to really muster our unconscious and our subconscious mind and align it with our deepest desire and say, yes, I am ready to destroy all those things in my life that aren't serving me, and I am ready to go through the transformation and the reconstruction of myself that will take me to my highest level. And it's potentially very painful, but that's what we're so afraid of. Anyway, I wanted to get to the the whole Mesopotamian thing and Nibiru and all that, because I think there's a lot of really powerful truths in there. But let me see. Okay, so Dana K, you may be new to my channel, so I recommend that you go and watch more of my videos because I talk a lot about rituals and what they are. So the short answer is the point of rituals is to fundamentally shift yourself on an unconscious level. All of your fears, your mistaken beliefs, all the things that are working against your highest awareness, ritual goes in to shift those things and change them. Okay? So, all right. Great. All right, so again, looking for the questions. I just to get the best use of time, I only answer questions that I think I have the answer to are relevant here. Ramnian Germany says, if you have realized you are a powerful God in this universe, could you turn this current universe to your dream universe? Yes. But you got to put the effort into it. Short answer, yes. All right, so let's now move on. I want to move on to Nibiru and what Nibiru is. So I talked to you about who this lady here who started the most recent thing about Planet X is going to come and destroy the world. And I think you get my understanding. I think at the very least she is extremely mistaken, if not an outright fraud, con artist. You know, I'll leave that up to the universe to decide, but at the very least I think she's got some very inaccurate understandings. But she didn't get this from nowhere. This whole thing about Nibiru coming in and destroying the world and all that kind of stuff came from this guy. Now, I have to confess, I didn't know who this guy was either. Some of you might know who he is. I did not know who he was. But this guy, his name is Zachariah Sitchin. He is a like me, so I can't really judge him. He's a self-proclaimed expert on ancient civilizations and language and the blah, 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 blah. So he apparently began reading the ancient Babylonian texts, the Sumerian texts, which were recently uncovered. I say recently, I think it was 18-something. Somebody somewhere in Iraq or somewhere like that found some clay Akkadian tablets from 4,000 years ago that had a creation myth on it called the Enuma Elish. And the Enuma Elish talks about the gods of the Sumerians and the later Akkadian Babylonians, and these gods are called the Anunnaki. And so it is the creation myth of the Anunnaki, and of course there's a connection to the Babylonian civilization and all that kind of stuff. So it just falls into the same, similar to, in terms of in terms of style and in terms of content, very similar to the Abrahamic tradition, which is what the Old Testament, by the way, is a creation myth focused on the creation of Israel. It is a nationalist text. People are talking about nationalism in politics today. Well, this is nothing new. And so the Abrahamic tradition is absolutely a nationalist mythology, and my argument is that that's why it's an ineffective mythology to be used for spirituality, because it's not designed to connect you to the universe. It's designed to take truths about the universe and then focus it into a political nationalist lens. And so I could get in on that, but I won't. But that is what the Enuma Elish is. And I'm going to explain to you why. Because as you know, I'm a big fan of mythology. And true mythology is spiritual stories and truths that have been given to human beings, that have been channeled through human beings from the gods, from the ascended masters, that have within them holographic truths like zip files, that if you understand how to interpret the symbolism, you will learn the secrets of the universe and how to evolve and become one of the gods. That is what true mythology is. And so the reason why I focus on mythology that's connected to tribal society is because, like the Norse tradition, for example, represents the pre-Christian tribal Germanic, which is my ancestors, the tribal Germanic mythology of the universe. And so that's why I focus on that. But it's the same with the African mythology that I learned when I trained with African shamans. It's the same with the Taoist tradition. The Taoist tradition, even though China was a big empire, actually the emperors of China had tried and numerous times. Even, you know, we see it now with the communist Chinese. They tried to wipe out the Taoists multiple times because the Taoist tradition focused on spiritual power that came through teachings and mythologies that go back to a period before there were such things as empires. Because once you have an empire, you have to control it. And the best way to control empires is through religion. The best way to hijack religion is to take the existing mythology and edit it and squish it down to fit within a nationalist framework. And that's all the Enuma Elish is. So, I'm going to tell you, now having said that, there are some really powerful myths in there and truths in there, but I'm going to show you what the mindset is and the filter behind it. Having said that, getting back to Zechariah Sitchin, this guy here who, if you look him up, you will see, even though he died a few years ago, this guy's written, I think, 13 books, which are very popular, about the Anunnaki and Nibiru and, you know, his history of the human race. He's the guy who started this whole thing that David Icke uses, and other people. Splinter groups like the woman I showed you, what's her name? Leader. She's up here lately. Nancy Leader, David Icke, and even other new guys like, you know, all the Flat Earth guys. They're still operating from this. This is what started it. So he created this whole interpretation. And just to give you an idea of how people just take things at face value and they don't, you know, the vast majority of the people out there who are talking about Anunnaki and reptilians, they are getting their source material from hearsay, from third, fourth, fifth generation people. They're not even getting it directly from the source. So even if somebody says, oh yes, I'm very into these ancient religions and the language and all of that, they're reading this guy's book, Zechariah Sitchin's book. Even those people are taking everything he says at face value. I'm just going to give you an example of, I guess, what should I do first? I've got a limited amount of time, so I'm going to just start telling you what Nibiru is. Let's just get to the point here. So I'm going to give you some quotes directly from the Enuma Elish, and I recommend that you read it. Anybody can do it. This is the thing. Anybody can go online and say, Enuma Elish online translation. And you can find multiple translations and read it. And maybe it's boring, maybe you won't understand it because it's going to be written in like, you know, ancient whatever thoughts of, you know, like what does the heck does any of that mean? But you're going to see that none of it talks about Nibiru being a planet where reptilian, Akkadian space astronauts came to Earth from. I know that my brain's too many thoughts going on at the same time. You'll see very clearly that there's nothing in it that says Nibiru is a planet that the Anunnaki came from. I'm going to tell you what it does say. So first I have to tell you that the Enuma Elish has a hero. And the hero is a guy named Marduk. And some of you may already know where I'm going because you can see that Marduk is the Akkadian name for the Sumerian original name for the hero. His name was Enlil. Enlil means Lord of the Storms. So if you look at pictures of Marduk on these Akkadian tablets, you'll see him holding what looks like a trident. Actually looks like kind of like a salad fork, but it represents the thunderbolt. And here he is chasing down the reptilian goddess of creation, who he's trying to destroy. Her name is Tiamat. She's a dragon, and she is threatening to destroy the world and kill the gods. And Enlil, who is actually the grandson of this being, is chasing after her with his thunderbolt, and he's going to destroy her. Okay, so that's the story. The Enuma Elish is basically the story of, I'm trying to find the quotes that I had here. The story of, no, that's not what I wanted. There it is. The Enuma Elish is the story of Enlil, the god of the storms, who later is called Marduk, who battles against his grandmother, I believe, or his great-grandmother, I can't remember which, the reptilian goddess of the waters, who's threatening to destroy the gods. He goes on to fight her and destroy her and save the gods and save the universe, and also save Babylon, Sumer. So basically, he is the god who is coming to destroy the chaos of nature so that human beings, he then creates human beings who then worship him, and these human beings then create his temples, which is what? Civilization. So their job is to create the temples of Marduk so that civilization can thrive. And they're not saying it, but what the meaning is, and this is what all empires do, by the way. They're saying that the light of civilization is going to bring the world into the next level of awareness, you know, enlightenment or whatever. Every empire in the world has done this, including the United States. Whenever the United States, you know, was, as it was growing and it was moving west and it was conquering whoever was in front of them, whether it was the Spanish or the Mexicans or the Native Americans or whomever, they were bringing from sea to shining sea. You remember that song as a kid? You sang the song about, manifest destiny. We are destined to be from sea to shining sea. I remember as a kid hearing that, you know, from sea to shining sea. You know, we sang it. I remember singing it at 5 years old, being filled with this nationalist fervor of, yes, of course, we are the best country in the world. We're the country of freedom, and we break the backs of the European enslavers, and we, you know, I mean, that's what every empire does. The Roman Empire, when it went in conquering whoever they conquered, they were bringing the light of civilization with them. When the Europeans were conquering the New World, they brought the light of the new religion with them. So their whole justification for whatever they did was that even enslaving people, taking people from Africa and enslaving them, the justification was that, well, we're Christians and they're not. They're going to hell. At least we're giving them the light of the true gospel so that they can know who God is and go to heaven. So that's what this is. Nothing more than that. So let's talk about that. So first off, let me just tell you what Nibiru is. Nibiru is not a planet. Nowhere here does it say that Nibiru is a planet. So let me just read. Let me see. I'm just going to read through this as I have it. Forgive my my chaos here. Forgive my Tiamat, my chaos. So he, meaning Marduk, he appointed Nibiru to oversee the boundaries so that all would be just. So what is Nibiru? So is that a planet? Again, the idea is that Nibiru is the planet that the reptilian beings came from in order to conquer Earth. It doesn't say that. It says that Marduk, Enlil, appointed Nibiru to oversee the boundaries so that all would be just. And then Marduk instructed each god in turn, furthering the organization of the universe. The gods, the Anunnaki, observed the net of creation, which Marduk has a net that he uses to capture, to destroy, and capture and destroy Tiamat. Remember the video where I talked about Indra Jala, the net of Indra, right? The gods observed the net of creation, the craft of Enlil's bow. So nothing in that says anything about Nibiru being a planet. It does, however, say this. Let's go to a second translation. So here's another translation. He, Marduk, made the stations for the great gods, the stars, their images, as the stars of the zodiac he fixed. He, Enlil, founded the station of Nibiru to determine their bounds that none might err or go astray. The moon god Enlil caused to shine forth, the night he entrusted to him. What does that make him? That makes him what? Makes Enlil Lord of the Moon. And who is the Lord of the Moon? Okay, are you seeing a pattern here? So Nibiru is two things. Nibiru is either the planet Jupiter, a lot of people believe it's the planet Jupiter, or the North Star. And as you know, the god Tiu, who is the original template for the thunder god, the lightning god, the god of the North Star, and the god of Jupiter, and the original father of the skies is Tiu. And that's where we get our original understanding of the lightning god. And Tiu is nothing more than the North Star. So what is it that they say that he is? Okay, so over here it says, when he, again we're talking about Marduk or Enlil, when he had marked the limits of the year, he gave them Nibiru, the pole of the universe, to hold their course, that never erring they should not stray through the sky. As Nibiru, now Marduk is taking on the name of Nibiru. He himself is Nibiru. As Nibiru, he projected the stars in their orbit. The wandering gods obey the laws of passage. Nibiru, at the still center, is the god they adore. So in that case, we're talking about the North Star. Because take a look at how the North Star is in the sky. Okay, so I think I'm making my point here. Listen, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that Nibiru is none of these things. But again, you know, if you look online, I'll stop, you know, bashing these people now. But listen, this is what's important. There is a reality out there. There is a spiritual reality out there. And it's important that if you want to truly tap into these forces, to understand what they are, to be a true shaman, a true seer, a true whatever, light giver, light bringer, you've got to be I want to say smart, but you know, you've got to be willing to have some sense about you. And people believe whatever the hell they're told, and they don't think critically. So I really want to create this midpoint where we have people. I want to bring back the station of the true shaman, the true wizard, the true light bringer, who lives in between the worlds, who can actually go and experience other realms of reality and come back and be able to give it to us in a practical way, which will make us smarter, not stupider. And unfortunately, you know, we have, you know, what people call the New Age. We have so many people running out there teaching so much nonsense, and people who really want to find spirituality can't, because there's few people out there who have the ability to teach you, here's the science of this thing we call shamanism or spirituality. You know, this is my fumbling attempt to try and do that, to be one of those people. So just to give you an example, so I've just read to you bits and pieces from the Enuma Elish. I think it's pretty clear that Nibiru is not a planet, and nowhere in there does it say that Nibiru is a planet of the Anunnaki and they used it to come to this earth. There's nothing in there that says that. It says quite different things. And yet, if I go online and I type in Anunnaki Nibiru, I get to this, at least one. I mean, there's just millions. I'm just picking one. One website that wants to talk about this. So I'm just reading straight from here. Where did the gods come from? According to the Sumerians, the gods came to Earth from a planet called Nibiru. Doesn't cite anything. Doesn't cite where it came from. It's just, that's fact. And people are picking it up and saying, oh yeah, according to the Sumerians, the Enuma Elish says this was written down 4,000 years ago that these astronauts came. This again, I'm reading from the website. Their descriptions of that planet match precisely the specification of the so-called Planet X, which is currently being sought by modern astronomers within our solar system. I mean, there are at least 5 or 6 complete untruths in that. But people read that and yeah, oh yeah, I saw it online. Yeah, I saw it on InfoWars, whatever. This planet is believed to have an elliptical orbit that takes it into the depths of space well beyond the orbit of Pluto. Hence, it has not been seen in recent times. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on. It's just so frustrating to me. Anyway, getting back to the point here before I lose myself in my own pointless rantings. The whole point of this is that here's what the Enuma Elish is about. This is important. The Enuma Elish is, I believe, based on mythology that came before the Sumerians. So again, understand, I have great respect for ancient teachings. The farther back in time we go, the more excited I get. However, human beings have always been human beings. And so I take into account the state of the society that is transmitting the mythology. So one of the reasons I'm so excited about Norse mythology is because Norse mythology comes almost, if not completely, from pre-Christian, pre-imperial Germanic tribal mythology, which means that you have people who live in direct relationship to their natural environment. And so mythology and spirituality have to be practical, because if it's not practical, you won't survive. And so for me, I see that and I follow that, and I can tell from my other experience, you know, whether I think a mythology is teaching you these things or whether it's doing its job of trying to give nationalism through religion. So the pre-Christian Germanic tribal people were not unified. They fought with each other. They shared a same common language, ethnicity, and religion. But their religion was based on shamanic, animist connection to nature. Same is true with the Vedic. You can see the beginnings of the Vedic to start to shift, but you can see even today in Indian, even though India is a big country, there are just so many people and scattered villages and a bunch of different languages, and they're still, when people are at home worshiping their gods, they're still worshiping in the Indo-European fashion. They don't use their religion to create this super global nationalism. That's what an empire does. Same thing with Taoism. Taoism was the anti-religion for the Chinese imperialists, and it still is to this day. It's because it follows these spiritual laws that only work if you are in direct relationship to the universe. Now, the Enuma Elish is a story about Enlil, the god of the storms. So they're taking the god of the storms, as we've talked about, Thunar, Indra. These are the gods who are the protectors of the boundaries. So they're taking the truth about the storm god, which is that the electromagnetic force and the gods that are associated with the electromagnetic force and the North Star and Jupiter. The deities associated with them are deities of protection for the human race. They are deities about boundaries. As you know, the Thurisaj rune is a rune of boundaries. See, I'm looking at the time here. I got about a half an hour. The Thurisaj rune is a rune of boundaries. So when you chant Thurisaj, which is Thunar's rune, you are empowering your personal boundaries not only on a physical level, on an emotional level, a psychological level, and a spiritual level. So again, let's take a look at what the Enuma Elish says about Nibiru. So different translations here. He, being Enlil, appointed Nibiru to oversee the boundaries so that all would be just. Second translation. He, Marduk, made the stations for the great gods. The stars, their images as the stars of the zodiac, he fixed. Enlil founded the station of Nibiru to determine their bounds that none might err or go astray. Okay, third translation. When he marked the limits of the year, he gave them Nibiru, the pole of the universe, to hold their course, that never erring they should not stray through the sky. As Nibiru, Enlil projected the stars in their orbit. The wandering gods obey the laws of passage. Nibiru at the still center is the god they adore. So when they worship Marduk, they are worshiping the thunder god. They are worshiping the god who comes to protect the boundaries of civilization. That's why instead of seeing the mythology as we see it like in the Norse, where we have these multiple giants and gods and goddesses, and whether they're good or bad is sort of kind of not really the point. That's because they're tribal people that live in tribal situations. And when I say tribal, by the way, I'm not meaning ethnic tribal. So let's get rid of that racist garbage nonsense. I'm talking about a group of people who work together and live together in isolated communities in nature. That's what I mean by tribal. They're living in these primitive conditions, and so they experience the thunder god and they experience the giantess Earth as, even if they're in conflict with each other, they can be the son or the grandson, all that kind of stuff. The giants and the gods and humans have this dynamic balance that they play. But when you create an empire, the first thing that happens is you become disconnected from your immediate environment, which means that you grow a bunch of crops and you conquer other nations and you make slaves out of them so that they'll grow your crops for you and go and make your, and then you live in cities. You pack yourself into cities, even if it's made out of clay, a bunch of cities, a bunch of buildings packed together, a bunch of people packed together like rats, who sit there and overlord the slaves they've conquered who are doing all the work in the field. So they're not out there, planting and reaping and hunting and gathering. They're sitting in their city doing things that people in cities do. And one of the things that people in cities do is they start being afraid of nature. And so nature becomes the enemy. The other thing that happens is that you start getting patriarchal societies where men start controlling women. And when that happens, and by the way, men are all intuitively afraid of women's power. Women, you should know that. The only people who aren't afraid of it are people who want more spiritual power. And then we want to bow down to the power of the feminine. And the interesting thing is, when a man bows down to the power of the feminine submits itself to her. So if you really want to control women out there, guys, you got to learn how to surrender to them first, because they will always have more power than you. But if you're living in a society, an empirical society, one of the first things you have to do is you have to start destroying the power of the feminine so that the masculine rulers of the city can then, control everything. So this is what Marduk represents. This is why Marduk is male, and this is why Marduk is seen as the king of Babylon, and that's why he's given the tablets of destinies. This is another thing. He's given this tablet of destinies, right? All that is taking mythological truths and sort of twisting them to fit within a political nationalist viewpoint. So now I'm going to really either confuse you or blow your mind. So why are people still talking about the Anunnaki and all this stuff, and they're talking about being lorded over by reptilians who come from Nibiru? And why are people obsessed with Anunnaki and this Enuma Elish? Because remember, the Enuma Elish is based upon Marduk, the thunder god, fighting the feminine reptilian earth goddess. People who live in fear, the people who want to really dive into this whole reptilian thing, are people who are living in their reptilian brainstem. And you've heard me talk about that the reptilians are real, they just live in your brainstem. That these are people who literally are fighting off, they're trying to fight off the reptilian influence of their own reptilian brain. But part of the thing about the reptilian brainstem is the harder you fight against, you struggle against that snake that's wrapped around you. The harder that you struggle against it, the tighter it squeezes. And so they become more and more obsessed with all of this stuff. With Nibiru coming out, and the government is lying to us, and NASA is lying to us because they're part of the reptilian elite. And so anybody who's see what I mean? So this, again, now let's back up another few feet here. This is what this eclipse is all about. Because this eclipse is in the house of the king, which is Leo. In the nakshatra of the sun of Leo, which is Magha, which is the ruler. Magha is, it means mighty. Comes from the same root as mighty. Maichtig, mighty. Magha, great. Mega, maximum, huge. The ruler. The sun is the big ruler. So on a personal level, it's the ego, it's the self. On a national level, it is the king or the president. It is your nation. So people who are nationalistic get their ego from the group mentality. I find it interesting, I'll shut up on this, I find it interesting that The people who scream the most about liberty are the people who are most entrenched in some kind of group ego mentality. You know, like people who talk about the media. How the media is out to get you and the media is wrong. Where are they getting their information about the media from? From the media. Where are they getting information about those other television stations? From Fox News. So this is what is trying to get torn apart. This is why people are fighting against each other. So let's hope that this apocalyptic eclipse will bring in a new world. So for those of you, whatever side you're on, I don't care what side you're on, if you want a new world, this is the time to create it. Okay? All right, so I'm almost running out of time here. I'm going to take a look at questions, and I'll answer whatever questions I can while I can. Okay, so I didn't see any new questions in there. Anyway, so I dumped a lot of stuff. I don't know if it was boring to you or not, if you enjoyed it, but you know, things don't come out of nowhere. And so, you know, when this kind of stuff starts happening and I start, even things that I don't quite get, you know, I have to remind myself that, you know what, there is some truth in here. And just because I'm responding to something that I might have a reaction to about what's happening, it's important for shamans to be able to, and teachers, shamans, teachers, whatever word you want to use, it's important that we be able to go, okay, what is really happening here? There's something happening. And so, yeah, I could start hammering away at the things that I don't like. But all that does is entrench people in their thoughts and beliefs anyway. So that doesn't accomplish what I want to do, which is I want to open up people's minds. And I'm doing it for, you know, personal reasons. I want to live in a more friendly world. I want to live in a world that that celebrates, you know, true spirituality, that loves the earth, that where people can be good to each other and kind to each other. I want to live in one of those worlds. So instead of going after the mindsets and just trying to bash the ones that I don't like, it is important to take a look at what is true and what are people seeing. And remember that if people are trapped in their reptilian brainstem, which we all get, you know, myself included, there's no doubt in my mind you have seen me do it and you will see me do it again. That we acknowledge the truth of what people are seeing, and then do our best to give it a third dimension, so that will bring people out of the reptilian brainstem. So again, I find it interesting that this whole myth of Marduk is really about that. It's about the struggle to get out of the reptilian brainstem. And who are the people that are struggling with this? The first empire that we know of that was created on this planet. According to modern history, the first empire was in Mesopotamia, starting with the Sumerians. And what is their myth? Their myth is about fighting against the reptilian demon that's trying to destroy them. So that means that there's an unconscious understanding that when we are doing things that are destroying us, we have an intuitive understanding. And so there's a thing called projection in psychology. So if you don't know what projection is, go look it up. Psychology projection. Projection is when you project onto others what you yourself are doing and feeling. So if I'm an ancient Sumerian who for the first time in history as we know it is creating an empire, a one world empire, then just by that I'm already getting trapped into my reptilian brainstem. Which means what? I'm going to then project that onto the world outside of me, which means that in their mythology, the male god Marduk has to destroy the evil reptilian goddess of chaos. She's really just nature, the goddess of nature. But she's the goddess of chaos, that, you know, her waters are going to destroy and flood the earth. That's where the whole myth of the flood comes from. There may have been a real flood that happened probably at the end of the ice ages, where, you know, ice melted everywhere and things filled up and the seas rose and all that kind of stuff. But it's also symbolic of emotions, because emotions are always represented by water. Whenever you have a dream of drowning, it means that you are feeling overwhelmed by your emotions and you feel like it's going to destroy you. And so that was this fear. The first civilization, at least in history, in recorded history, the first civilization is arising out of what? The ice ages and all of this water. And water is emotions. And they're going from a state of living as people who lived in tribal units, which again are small groups of people who live and depend on each other and live in direct connection to the environment. And they're moving into creating the first empire, where you're going to have thousands and thousands or hundreds of thousands of people living within these artificial environments we call cities, and they're going to have to conquer other people and enslave them and make them do all of their farming for them and make them do all of the making of the clothes and the blah blah blah. And then you live in this place of where your intellect, you know, people used to say, you know, about the Greeks, well, the Greeks created this great society where they no longer had to be concerned with manual labor, and then that's where the philosophers came from. It's true. And those philosophers, as great as some of those philosophies are, I mean, oh my God, they get stuck in so much intellectual garbage. Oh my God, go live your life. So anyway, I'm rambling on and on, but you get it. The two-dimensional intellect versus the multi-dimensional living in society. Excuse me, living in nature. Multi-dimensional living in nature, as opposed to living in two-dimensional civilization. All right, so that's kind of bringing me towards the end of today. I've got about 10 minutes left, and then I got to take a call. I don't think this will be the last time that we've talked about this. I may want to talk about it some more since it's coming up. And I'm going to see if there's any questions here. C. Betrano asks me, sir, can you help someone have an out-of-body experience consciously from a distance? Even if I could, I wouldn't do that. You know, the assumption behind that, if I'm hearing you right, is that that's going to benefit you. It may not. Getting out of yourself, trying to escape yourself, your body, your feelings, isn't necessarily helpful. The only reason to do these like shamanic journeys, which I do, is to go and learn information that you can use to better your life. But even if I could do that, I sure as heck would not do that, because I'd be taking away your experience of learning that for yourself. And I don't think that's helpful. So I can't do that, and I wouldn't even if I could. Okay. Anyway, okay. So I'm getting more questions that I don't think I want to answer. Um, yeah. Any questions having to do with archons? Any questions having to do with, you know, we're us living in a matrix that is a computer program? I think by now you know that I think that's nonsense. That is just, again, projection. People who live in their devices, who've grown up living in their devices, who don't know how to connect with the world outside of the internet, are going to project that onto the world and think that the world is a computer program. People who are trapped in their reptilian brainstems, who live in fear, are going to project into the world their experience that the world is filled with reptilians that are trying to control and dominate them. So any questions like that, that's the message I'm trying to give on that. Okay, so I am going to let you guys go. And I hope this was helpful. I hope it was entertaining. I know I went off on a lot of rantings and subjects, but anyway, I think we'll talk about this some more. So that's it for now, my friends. Until next time, remember that as we come up to this, oh, somebody, by the way, before I go, somebody asked, should they do 2 rituals? No. Why do you need to do 2 rituals on the eclipse? Why the thing about the eclipse is, whatever it is you're doing, it doesn't matter what you're doing, what ritual you're doing, whether you're staying at home and having a good time or whether you're out there underneath with a bonfire praying to whomever. Whatever it is that you're doing, focus on letting go of any ego attachments that aren't serving you. Listen to your feelings. If fear comes up, go, what is it that I'm afraid of? Or even if you don't know what it is, just go, that's me. I'm going to let go of my fear. I'm not going to let it control me. And I'm going to intend for my life to go to the next level. It doesn't matter. So doing multiple things, that's not going to help you. You're doing too much. So just one ritual is fine. You don't need to do any more than that. So that's it. I'll do some more talking. I think I'll try and get some more talking about this before we get to the eclipse. All right, my friends, I've got to take a phone call. Thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you guys soon.